Let's move on to Pittsburgh and Ben Roethlisberger. It's unusual to be dealing with a quarterback with dual ankle injuries. It's also very unusual to hear about a quarterback throwing with his right hand has a left pectoral injury.
Right.
Where does your mind go when you hear 39-year-old right-handed quarterback trying to come back and play with a left pec injury?
Well, I think the first question the medical staff for the Steelers probably asks is this a strain, meaning a tearing of the muscle itself, or is it a contusion?
Right.
Watching the game and saw the hits that he took, most likely it's a contusion. And again, it's on the left pec, not his throwing shoulder. So it's more of a bruise. But you say, it's the other arm. You're not throwing with that arm. But that follow through and the ability to initiate that throw once that force starts upstairs has a lot to do with that left shoulder. So that's a real limiting factor for him. And he's, let's face it, he's no gazelle to begin with. But that makes it a lot tougher for him to throw, move around, do what he has to. So you can label this and say it's more of a pain tolerance. And you see Coach Tomlin says, hey, we got to see, and we hope he can play this weekend. But I think it comes down to him, his ability to kind of throw with accuracy, especially on the longer balls. So the shorter balls, he's a strong arm quarterback.
Right.
This should be something, if it truly is a bruise, that should be managed well. It may be a last minute thing, but more likely this is something you probably could play with.
Yeah,
compared to a lot of the injuries, especially in the non-throwing arm.
Right. I know it's interesting. Like, first off, you're throwing. I'm lefty, so you got to do the opposite. But like what Mike's saying, short throws, you might not have to get the upper body to torque as much and all that. But okay, now I got to put some mustard on it. As anybody knows, you're going to get your shoulder to the target and then really rip that front shoulder pectoral out of the way to let your throwing arm come through and the follow through there to Mike's point there. So you would feel better if it's the contusion though over the first part of the, let's just say, a true muscle strain or pull there, right?
I would, and there's actually two pec muscles. There's the one you see on the outside and the deeper one. They both really affect the whole shoulder girdle. So I feel better if it was a contusion. And the other thing that comes into play here that most people don't think about is with a chest injury, you're going to get bleeding, it's going to drain down in, and the ribs are going to be sore as well, is the modern day shoulder pads, as you guys know, when you put those on, you really have to cinch them tight because it bows the top of the shoulder pad to protect the top of the shoulder when they're taking the impact. So really cinching down on those tight rib belts on a shoulder pad is not doing those that rib contusion or rib injury, or in this case, a pec injury, any favors.
Yeah, definitely not. And I'm with you. I mean, just watching the film back, he took some shots that were big time in the game. And there was one in particular on a fourth down that I tried to point out today on PFT that I thought this was the one where he takes just a helmet right to it. It's hard to tell either way, but we'll see if Big Ben can play.
Is it something that he could make worse? Like, would you recommend that he sit it out, or just like, hey, live with it, I think you'll be okay, live with some pain, and let's play through it?
Yeah, it's not one of those things you're really worried about it being really detrimental down the road, especially if it's more of a bruise than a tear. If it's tearing off the bone, and you guys have probably seen a lot of the offensive linemen get those pec tears, and you got to let them scar down. We had a really bad one with Lawrence Taylor when I was with the Giants. You get those, you got to let it quiet down, even if it's the non-throwing arm. So a tear makes it more concerning. If it's more of a bruise, it's pain management, control the swelling, control the edema. Other than him taking a really bad shot on it as a quarterback, I think the risk of re-injuring it, making that a lot worse, I think is pretty minimal.
Yeah, we're back to the ankle on an AFC quarterback. This time it's Derek Carr with the Vegas Raiders. You saw what he did there in Pittsburgh. Unlike Carson Wentz, it's not 2, it's 1. But he stayed down for a while, played well afterward, but it looked to be a little bit more it looked to be pretty severe. You could picture him still feeling that quite a bit this weekend, and he's listed as questionable.
Absolutely. And I think a big factor in this that probably came into play is that's the same ankle, the right ankle that he fractured back in 2016.
That's right.
So I've dislocated and fractured my ankle. When you take hits on that, it wakes you up for sure. So I think that's some of the reason. And will that previous fracture play into his favor? In a sense, maybe he may still have some hardware still in there from that injury in that fracture where he had surgery that ended the season. So that may give that bone a little bit more stability itself. But kind of coming back to like we talked with Carson, did this contribute as kind of a high ankle sprain? You saw that pile kind of roll into him, and he kind of went down slow, and that you could have easily see that play into a knee injury as well.
Right.
You see that happen quite often. So kind of high ankle sprain, low ankle sprain. Did the ankle have a little extra play in it before? The great thing that gives you kind of peace in mind with Derek is the way he came back. They evaluated him on the sideline. The Raiders staff put a spat on it, which is taping over the shoe, and he's able to come back and play in the game. that's a pretty good indicator that things are in a better scenario there. But one thing I've learned is the true essence of a high ankle sprain doesn't come out to about 12 hours later.
Yeah.
So players are all geeked up. That was in the third quarter. He's got to get through another quarter. It's a big game. He wants to play. He's playing well, wants to stay on a roll. Well, more than one time, I'll have a player have an injury. You say, this may turn into something. I'm going to give him a walking boot to take home. And they say, I don't need this thing. Just leave it here. Yeah. I said, no, trust me, take it. 9 times out of 10, when they come back in the athletic training the next morning, they're wearing that same boot.
Yeah.
So sometimes 12 hours later, you get a better feel. Is this really just a sprain of an ankle, or we deal with a high ankle sprain? I think that's what the Raiders are going to figure out this week.
I could speak to that a little bit, just in the fact that I've broken my ankle and foot a few times and had one bad high ankle sprain. And I could tell you the high ankle sprain was probably the worst thing I ever dealt with. It lingered for years, not just like that year. I felt like it took me 2 years to where I could go on a basketball court and cut and go, oh, wait, I don't feel that anymore. So it'll be interesting to say. But I think what you're saying is your educated guess with the way the game ended, how he looked. It sounds like you're betting he'll be able to play. You just see how bad he is and can he move and really be the athlete he needs to be.
I would. I'm hoping some of that stayed down longer than expected. And you saw how quick the medical staff got out there at record speed. But the fact that he stayed down was probably the fear factor, understandably so, of the previous fracture of the same ankle. Thought his bat, came back and played. I think that's a pretty good indication. This is more of a low-grade ankle sprain than something that might have a lot of downtime. But again, later in this week, I think when the injury reports start coming out, we're going to feel whether that is the case.
Yeah. I have one more quick question on this one about Derek Carr. Would you treat that ankle differently knowing that there had been serious trauma in that space in recent years?
Yes, but the good news is you have a full op note and a surgery note to know exactly what happened before. Where was the damage? Was there any arthritis in certain areas? Where was the fracture located? So you have a lot more insight to that ankle because your surgeon has been in there already. But yeah, you would treat that a little bit differently because there's a pretty good chance he probably didn't gain full range of motion back. So restoring that motion becomes a higher priority strength-wise. It's not unusual to have that kind of an injury, as you probably know, Chris, from your injuries, is when you come back, that ankle actually ends up stronger with better balance, everything on that injured ankle because you focus on it so much. So That's why I said right up front, the previous injury that he had in the surgery and the extensive rehab may play into his favor in how they handle this, both from the player's perspective and the Raiders medical staff.
Let's go to Chicago, where at quarterback, Mike, the main story is that Justin Fields is getting the starts coming up against Cleveland this weekend. But as long as we're talking injuries and medicine here with Andy Dalton, big worry that there was some major damage to the knee. It came out as just a bone bruise. And I say just a bone bruise. I don't want to say it's no issue, but I put it on your plate. What exactly is a bone bruise to a quarterback at this age?
Well, bone bruise can be pretty bad. I've seen bone bruises that quiet down in 2 weeks. I've seen them last for a whole year. So bone bruises can be a real big deal. And a lot of times we get caught up and we have the MRI and the ACL is good, the meniscus is okay. How's the MCL? And we kind of forget about the bone thinking it's, solid granite. But when you get bleeding into a bone, which is the definition of a bone bruise, it can linger for a long period of time. And we saw that play. It didn't look like much. Andy kind of changed direction. You see that knee buckle a little bit. And the way it kind of buckles, you kind of compress the outside part of the knee joint. So when that happens, you kind of cling the shin bone on the thigh bone, if you will. It becomes really painful. Again, it can take time to quiet itself down. The knee was stable. They felt good about that. So this really comes down to a pain tolerance. The fact that, Andy's a quarterback and the mobility that he has, putting a brace on it can help take a little bit of pressure off that bone bruise, be it on the inside of the knee or the inside compartment, the outside of the knee. So I think with that, it's time-wise, how does it quiet down, maintaining the quad strength. And sometimes with these bone bruises, Paul, you can get a lot of swelling in the knee. So now you're not only dealing with the injury, but you get a big puffy knee, then that quickly makes the leg weak. So the first few days of managing a bone bruise is critical, whether this recovery is on the short track or on the long track.
I was shocked to hear that it was a bone bruise because it was a non-contact thing. So I was like, wait, how do you get a bruise on your bone without anybody hitting you there? And that's interesting to hear.
Yeah.
So I mean,
it's very easy to happen.
It is very easy to happen. Okay.
If you look at the way it is, you think of bone bruise as someone hitting you, and typically if you think of someone's hitting you, the trauma's on the bone but not on the joint surface. Gotcha. The issue here with the bone bruise, understandably so here, and most likely with Andy's case, is the joint surfaces. I got a model for everything.
I love it. Love it.
here's your knee. So in his case, as he's going out of bounds, as he changes direction here, you're compressing one side of the joint while you're decompressing the other. So you're taking that shin bone and it slams down onto the thigh bone slams down onto the shin bone. And the contusion of that causes bleeding into the bone. So yeah, they can be really painful. And really, if you're left untreated, a bone bruise can actually develop into a full-fledged fracture. Say that 3 times.
Wow.
So you got to really treat these carefully. They're probably going to go back and do more MRIs down the road to make sure that the edema or the swelling in the bone is subsiding. So this bone bruise is heading in the right direction, not the wrong direction. So like I said, early on, you got to be really careful with these. And sometimes you even put them in crutches just to take some of the weight off it,
right,
and give the body's ability to absorb that swelling and get the swelling out of the bone, make the bone feel a lot better.
So it sounds like we're going to be see Justin Fields maybe for more than 1 week, no matter what, is just at least the diagnosis and how you. Yeah.
But again, bone bruises are really temperamental. It can be short-term or long-term. Typically speaking, the more conservative you treat it right up front, the quicker these things come back. You can't just put your big boy pants on and try to hammer through a bone bruise.
Right.
Those tend to backfire.
Okay, that's good to know, because that's kind of what I was thinking. Like, oh, you'll be able to suck it up. It's just a bruise in your bone.
Who's the insensitive idiot at this set who said it's just a bone bruise? Is that you?
Right, it probably was me.
It actually came from my side. I appreciate you taking the bullet for that one.
Good, you said it too. Good.
Hey, we have one more. Tua Tagovailoa, we just found out, Mike, is out with fractured ribs. And my question here is about ribs. First of all, ribs, it's such a nasty injury. Anybody who's had any kind of injury to the ribs, you can't breathe. Like, let alone if you have to sneeze, it brings tears. But quarterbacks play a lot with rib injuries, whether they're cracked or bruised, and it's amazing that they do that. Where's the line that makes it where like trainers say, okay, this is going to be really painful, but we think you can play with it, and they draw that line and say, okay, it's fractured, you can't play? What is that difference?
Well, the first one is the player has to go out and protect himself. If he's so sore and doesn't have the mobility, he can't protect himself, regardless what he's going to do with the football. That's the first step. You can't protect yourself, you're staying on the sideline. The other part when it comes to ribs is, where are they broken? I mean, that hit on Tua was a big one. You saw he got slammed down. That could have very easily been a left shoulder, and him obviously, Tua Tagovailoa being a left-handed quarterback, he landed high onto the backside of that left shoulder. So my first question is, where were the fractures? It could have easily been a high rib fracture, which is much more concerning and more painful, or was a fracture on the right side where the player himself actually landed, the defensive player landed on him. So the second thing is, where is the location of the fracture? And then the third thing is, how unstable is that fracture or fractures? If the fractures are real unstable, that's a real concern, because we know what's right behind it, the all-important lungs. So you got to really protect those. So if it's an unstable fracture, you can put them on the shelf for a few weeks minimum, because it's going to take time for the stability of that fracture site. So there's a lot of different factors there, and you guys know the rotation with throwing in ribs is huge. I just kind of joke about it, say ribs only hurt when you breathe. But the reality is, anything you do with the ribs on the field, of averting someone, and like we talked earlier with Big Ben, is the tightening up of those shoulder pads to properly allow the shoulder pads to protect the shoulders and the shoulder girdle. You cinch tight straps on a shoulder pad down on broken ribs. That's not a lot of fun.
Well, and I think the point he makes that I think jumps out to me more than anything is the highness of like, if it's high up there, and your arm, of course, is folding up there. So there's a lot of stuff that's moving. I've had some like bone bruises in my ribs before. Yeah, my right side, because I'm a lefty, I didn't really give a shit. But my left side, if you got it up there towards the armpit, that's where the slingshot, that's where your arm is kind of rotating, and that can get really uncomfortable.
Yeah. And you think about so many of the other injuries, Mike, that there's motion and movement and exercises you can do to get that road back or to begin that road back to playing. With the fractured ribs, if they're up high, what can an athletic trainer do to help?
Well, one thing I found was a real blessing when it comes to rehabbing something like this, especially with throwers, is get them in the pool, get them in the water, get them deep, neck deep in the water, so they could do some of the resistance of the water. It's very consistent with the resistance. They tend to stay a lot more mobile there. So getting in the water, doing hydrotherapy pool drills where you can kind of get that control, get the motion, work on the posture. Because the thing is, you guys know better than I do, is it's really important to keep that rotator cuff strong. So when you get fractures with ribs with quarterbacks, You get him in all kinds of contorted positions, get him on the table, do a lot of band work, manual resistance, because you can't get away from that rotator cuff, regardless whether they're going to be out for 3 days or 3 weeks.
Right.
So we talked earlier, a couple of weeks ago, about Dak Prescott and how that ankle may be affecting what's going on with the shoulder and the rotator cuff. It's even probably more important here with Tua, now that he's in the regular season, is, yeah, you're treating the ribs. There's not a lot you can do for those. Time is your best friend when it comes to that. But you got to maintain everything around those ribs, the rotator cuff, the core strength. So it really is going to, the Miami Dolphins medical staff, and they got a great one, are going to have to be creative in keeping that rotator cuff, keeping the muscles, keeping its flexibility, working on body balance. All those things go into being a really good quarterback. So when the ribs are ready, the rest of the body's ready.
Yeah, gotcha. You the man, Mike. You
yes.
are the man.
Awesome
I mean,
stuff,
I learn something new every time. And, man, anytime we got, like, important injuries around the NFL, you are the guy we're going to call, Mike.
I always enjoy it. I love spending time with you guys.
Thanks, buddy. Be good. We'll talk to you soon, and have a good rest of your week, Mike.
Take care, guys.
Hi, I'm Mike Tirico, and thanks for watching. Make sure to hit subscribe for the latest news and highlights from NBC Sports.